Okay, we'll just go from here. Um, so first, I just want to say I'm a new father, so this talk is a little uh, tough, but that's my little son there. He's pretty cute. So a lot of this thought has been happening while imminently about to change a diaper or something like that. But it's funny because it brings a little bit of another point of view and some, I don't know, I feel like I've actually had some good epiphanies about this subject in the last few weeks while having this big life event. So I hope I can bring some of that here and then get some from you guys. I do want to have a bit of a discussion, but I also am hoping to go over a few rudimentary or somewhat advanced things that are sort of the building blocks for the way I'm seeing sequencing and that sort of thing go ahead, and also just important kind of modern TouchDesigner workflows that any system that kind of includes things that connect to other things, that play things, that ingest things, that have mechanisms to them, I think it's important to get on board, because a lot of what the guys were talking about in the question and answer at the end yesterday has to do with new features that maybe aren't the most broadcasted yet, or workflows that aren't quite disseminated to everybody. So anyways, I guess I'll just say I'm Peter. Obviously, you guys know. Hey, yeah, I think so. And I've been around for a while in touch now, and feel very grateful to have been part of this community. And I quit my old job to do the Amon Tobin show kind of way back when, and we actually debuted that show here 8 years ago or so. And it's an interesting kind of looping timeline to be back here and sort of have all of that going on previously. But from that show onward has been a constant discussion about sequencing and playback and syncing to external timelines and, tight synchronization with audio and cueing and, and I think we all feel that. Certainly there are some applications of TouchDesigner that have very little need for a timeline. So, but most of the things I've found myself involved in, typically because there's some music involved, is going to just have something to do with time, right? And putting things in order in time, overlapping in time, that kind of stuff. So hence the discussion yesterday as well about the need for timelines and that sort of thing. And you heard Greg yesterday say, well, you guys figure out what you want and do it. And my thought there is we can all discuss that, and it'll be an ongoing long discussion. It's already started. People like Keith and I have been talking about it, Jarrett with Derivative. And I think my hope is to get that discussion a little more focused and maybe find a common set of features or agreed upon working methods that could establish a foundation for anybody's need in touch to do this stuff. And at least, we're always going to have to build a foundation and then another top layer and another layer. And at some point, you will probably have to branch off and build your own version. But the point is that maybe we can get a little more structure under our feet before we have to break off and be like, oh, well, I need 4 video tracks that are synced to 4 audio tracks plus 3 asynchronous 7 one-channel audio feeds and 4 different animation bins, and these sort of like, okay, when you kind of crystallize into a project and what your output is or what your specific needs are, you might have more of a kit of parts to start working with. That's kind of where I'm thinking these things should go. So I think I wanted to just talk about a few use cases that I've had in the past, and then maybe if anybody has anything interesting to just throw in there, if I'm kind of missing anything that seems important. Sorry, so this is just my notion of me preparing for this, and so I'm going to kind of use it to talk about some of this stuff. But so the big use cases that I've come across in my work are, this isn't in exactly the right order, but the first one would have been that show I first did, I quit my job for, the Amon Tobin ISAM show. That was a hit, play, and go for the most part, but it had to be synchronized to an external playback, and then essentially one big long show, but a very choreographed show with different pieces of media throughout, as well as some cues and that sort of thing. So that was kind of like, you might think of that maybe the Adobe Premiere model, where you're editing a feature or something like that. And then the next use case that I came across after was more like VJing, right? Clips pulled up at will in multi-layer context and multiple asynchronous players. And that was what, in the touch world, I made a system called Epic. Keith made a system called Luminosity. There's another set of guys that made a thing called Crescent Sun, and everyone else who's had to make their own little VJ player. I consider that a use case of timelines as well, because inevitably you either want to trim your clips like you would in a resolume or VDMX or something, and you want to be able to play them back, you want to be able to follow them, string them together, trigger multiple ones at the same time, synchronize to tempo, all that kind of stuff. So then after that, I moved on to a client for Bass Nectar, the DJ. And that's probably where a lot of this really got put, a lot of my thinking of this stuff got its first, second, and third pass when I've been given the opportunity to iterate that system. So the Bass Nectar system, and I have it pulled up here. The important part is this editor. So this is a show system that has a incredibly large library of musical pieces, right? Songs. So that's what all this is on the left. There's somewhere around 500 or 600 of these now. And every one of them has some kind of a sequence involved. This one is rather simple. In fact, this one is simply showing me the audio involved in this sequence. But this one is maybe a little more complex. And the Bass Nectar system is designed to kind of at will pull up any one of these sequences triggered from an external Ableton playback system on stage connected with Ethernet and using Max MSP as sort of a prototypical TD Ableton in a way to fire off sequences that are synced to different tracks in Ableton. And then what we do is we essentially assume that we're going to get a perfect sync based in music time, and then we can lay down our own tracks that we will then know will play to that song, and it can be jumped around. It can be it can be time stretched, right? So the tempo of the music system will affect the speed and keep everything in sync. And there's quite a bit of robust checking in case of data loss or in case of an unexpected jump ahead, sort of belt and suspenders, like continually checking where the Ableton playhead is at and where my playhead is at, and within a certain threshold we'll get back, right? That use case is very, I would say it's not the perfect no frame drop kind of thing, mainly because it's such a it's a crazy atmosphere, right? And the audience is not looking for that. They're looking for tight sync at a, you know, maybe the 100 to 200 millisecond threshold. So it's more important to be able to keep sync on a larger scale than it is at that, you know, the perfect frame sync. And I say that because the data coming from Ableton is jumpy, and so we have to give a little bit of a tolerance. But I'm not going into that sync method so much today, mainly because there's new tools that I think make it a lot easier. TD Ableton and Ableton Link assures a much smoother ramp and that sort of thing. But anyways, so this was kind of the solidification of really, okay, I kind of need real-time Premiere or real-time After Effects at my disposal in some way, right? With tracks and track types and layers. I'll try to find a good example of like a song that uses most of these features. Maybe this one. Oh, this one doesn't have any other data. This is just a video synced to audio. So you can see audio and video down here and up here. These are my layers or tracks. But let me find one that has kind of everything. Like, oh, I know. Whiplash. Yeah, this one's good. Yeah, like here's, I don't know, a little more complex. So this has an audio track, a MIDI track, and a video track. And in this case, this is another lovely kind of use case that we came up with using, you know, the tried and true 50-year-old protocol MIDI, of which every application sort of supports and, as requested last night, exports. So in this case, my lighting designer can sit with Ableton, and that's it. Plugged in MIDI directly into his desk, and he can sequence songs based on the music, and then he can give us a MIDI clip that has been just saved out from Ableton, and we load it in and play it back. And essentially we did a lot of work to make sure that whatever he's getting out of Ableton in terms of how MIDI on-off and that kind of stuff works is what our system will serve. So it's allowed him to not need to sit with a big TouchDesigner setup. He can just sit with an out-of-the-box piece of software and design his cues and then label them in the right way and give them to us, and we ingest them and play them back with this setup. And now we've done the same thing with control of resolume. So we have so when you don't have an editor able to make a whole nice, lovely video, we can assign a template of resolume that will trigger off of actually OSC, but we convert MIDI into OSC so that they can do it. That was cool, and that just was another example of, okay, we need audio video channels. Maybe MIDI is sort of a special type of channel data, but just more data types that need to be played back in time. So that's kind of a very heavy use case of the need for very flexible, very kind of open-ended timelines and different data in that timeline. And then I just wanted to put out another well, two other kind of use cases that I'm aware of. The idea of branching timelines, right? Interactive shows that you might think of like an escape room or a ride that has different states, or kind of choose your own adventure kind of things, where a designer for the kind of experience may make different paths, right, that can play back throughout an experience. And those are still timelines. It's just there's junction points where we have to go off in a new direction, or stitch in time that wasn't expected to be there. If you were just making one big long timeline. So that's kind of a different various use case that I've come across and also really interested in expanding in the future. And then I think it kind of goes without saying, but maybe one other thing is just the notion of placing cues on a timeline that can do other things, presets, and that kind of thing. I've done a little bit of. I haven't circled back around to that, but I hope to, keep that in the bin as we kind of talk about what the different needs are. So, does anybody have anything they think is like a use of this sort of stuff that isn't covered in any of that like we should just put in the hopper to think about? David? Yes. When you mean content generation, you mean like generative content, recorded or sort of sequenced, animated, that kind of thing? Absolutely. I think kind of bringing in real-time generated effects or content into this, kind of making a space for that. I agree. I think when I've been conceiving of this stuff, I usually, in my mind, that gets covered under kind of channel sequences and presets or cues, because if you have sort of an engine that runs a real-time scene or character or something like that, any control of that is going to be through channels or telling it to do something at a distinct time, I believe. So yeah, but I think that in a way it's like you, and I'll get to this, but you might come up with a sort of a clip type in your own system that is meant to, when it is found in the player or on a particular track, it'd be like, oh, all of these channels get routed to this effect. Or if you need to make a more complex thing where it's like, well, here's this effect or this generative piece, and here's this piece, another one, you have to kind of build the data in for how to tell the playback engine to switch between them or blend between them or something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, I think I do have a tendency to forget the generative stuff, because my head's been in this sequencing world and media file playback world for a long time. I do have a thought in here about chops, like generated chops, or things that are built with pattern and wave and that kind of stuff. That, right, it's still a time block that can be looked at and played back. But yeah, that's a good point. Did you have? Keyframing. Yeah, I think it's a similar, that's kind of in conjunction, yeah. Character rigged animation, it's kind of just a lot more channels, right? But it's still a clip of channels, essentially, I think. But that's a good one. I think there probably should be some more thought put into all the various ways that essentially chops, and maybe there's some partner data that needs to go along in tandem with that, can get absorbed into this kind of talk and system. Okay, so that's, I don't know. Those are great points, and those are some of the uses. And so the idea here is how to kind of help us all accommodate for those, so I'm gonna go a little bit into the workflow and the sort of the concepts that I've been learning and also helping kind of develop and testing, that I think really make this stuff make this stuff possible. So I'll just show you guys. I think, let's see if I can copy this and see if this actually wants to work. Yeah. So this is a newer version of what I've been working on, totally in progress, completely in progress. So sorry that it may be a bit of a mess, but here's a timeline that I can drag and select elements on. Right. So I can kind of talk about some of those techniques. And it looks like this viewer didn't pick up this viewer anymore, but oh, I know why. This I just threw in here at the last minute to get some kind of preview. And I was doing it in a very bad way. I'll show you how to fix that shortly, but So this is pretty cool, right? I think maybe many of you have built something similar. You always get to like just about where you need it, and then you gotta forget about it, or you on to the next project, or you come back around and keep working on it. And what I want to get to is that I really think the thing that will make this more possible, way more than any of the techniques to make a UI or like the fancy tricks to get click and moving and all this stuff, right? All of this is like, it's great, but it's just, in the end, we want this built right. But we can't build it right until we can tell whoever's going to build it exactly kind of what we want, and what we want at a nice, general, flexible level. And so I think the important discussion is to refine the sort of the data types, or all the information that goes into informing this. And this speaks kind of directly to the new style of component building that happens in Touch somewhat these days in certain projects and use cases. So this whole UI, which, I hope everybody, we can also talk a little bit about this, but just from a UI point of view, everybody maybe is familiar now with the new everything filling and kind of laying out nicely. Is anybody using the newer layout features, building their UIs? Okay. I basically highly recommend always building with, just set your children to top to bottom or left to right, and then everything should fill from that. So there's an option now for, yeah. But as well, this is a nice little, expert thing, but these little guys that you might find in the op browser component that let you do this kind of thing, pretty easy to rig up. I think they're called panel dividers. If you look at the op browser, it's pretty. You can grab that panel divider, kind of arrange your panel in the same way that Ivan did in the op browser, and hook up basically some expressions to the two splits, and it'll control them pretty well. It's quite nice. So I've been building these kinds of more app style UIs in that way, just to give some access to that. It's called Op Browser. I think it's in Tools. I can look for you real quick here too. Yeah, Op Browser right there. It's a really lovely precedent for how to make this kind of paned UI. Also, this is an op browser sitting in the left with all the options turned off but the tree viewer. So there's a bunch of stuff, if you work in the right way, that you kind of get for free now with Touch, especially for these larger media management kind of things. So every one of these is a representation of a base comp, and that's what I'm getting its parameters here when I select it in my UI for the time being. But where are those? Oops. I have all of those in a place up here in a thing called assets, and the ones we're looking at are actually here. So I've come up with a thought about a custom component that I call an event. And when I was first thinking of this, I thought of this in a more rigid hierarchy. A sequence being at the top, and you might call it like a media or a file reference being at the bottom. And then to get there, you got to go sequence, event, clip, and then the source of the clip. And that was what that base nectar system was built on. Now, somewhere in there is like an event that has no time, which is like a marker or a cue. And so the concept of an event is essentially a empty time block, right, that something can live inside of. I've decided, and I think this is a decent proposal, that really the only thing you really need are events. And if events are allowed to have stuff inside of them, then that's what happens in that event. So a sequence is just an event with other events in it, right? Here's a bigger sequence with a bunch of events. These events are I've kind of put the concept of a clip on them. And so this gets into these concepts of how do you build your custom components to have everything you want. And you're essentially making what I call an asset, or an asset class out of these components. And this is where all the stuff that you might think about with your sort of elements on a timeline, elements in a sequence, you sort of start to stuff that stuff into. And these are the things that I'd like to, figure out. What is the base level of useful parameters to define these things, and then what would be considered something that like a user in a specific project might need to add. So conceptually now I have a notion of track and layer. Some people might put those together, might think those are the same thing. I'm thinking right now about time in one dimension and track in this dimension, and maybe layer in the Z dimension. But also thinking of, right, with those timelines, when you make that UI, everybody mostly thinks about track as what you see going down, right? And maybe this is a little too out there, but you could consider that if we have a very flexible, open-ended timeline tool, that you should be able to define what that axis represents, right? So you can organize your things in different ways. You're always going to see time on this axis. Maybe we can agree on that. But maybe it's useful to stratify in different ways, because right now, this isn't necessarily maybe it's not that useful, but right now my clips can be together, they can overlap in time, and I don't really see a problem with that. It might be useful to want to see consecutive, things that are to not allow a track to have things that overlap, right? That's something that most of us would consider a rule when talking about Premiere or After Effects. It's like, if it's going to overlap, it's got to be on another track, right? Probably, but maybe maybe a track is actually a multi-channel sort of thing, or I want to think about having that flexibility before restricting it with those rules that we typically take for granted. So anyways, these clips have a set of options, and I kind of lifted this. I think it takes a little bit of work, and I did it, or a little bit of patience, but I do recommend looking at Greg's time base, because there really are some pretty important concepts in there, even though it's a little tough to pick through his style of building in TouchDesigner, which is that the UI, the data, and the engine are all one thing, and they're all intermixed, and that's something I would recommend not doing for these sorts of needs. When you have, like for Base Nectar, I have 500 sequences, so I can't have 500 time bases in my project file, right? My sequences need to be very slim, just for file size reasons, right? I can't have a UI with every sequence, nor can I have an engine with every sequence, and that's a really important concept to consider. Is these clips don't have movie players in them, right? They are only the definition of what would inform a movie player in an engine. And so that's an important concept in this new workflow, is comps connecting to comps connecting to comps, whether it's an asset that connects to a player, right? So I'm a player. Let's look at the simple player. I'm a player, and I give all my players a source comp parameter. In fact, I give almost everything that's meant to connect to one comp a source comp parameter, and then I let an extension decide whether it's allowed to get put on there. But I've kind of realized that in these generalizing this stuff, the first thing that any of these components need to do is connect to another component, so they all have source comp. That's debatable whether that's the right word, but this player has a source comp. This clip has a clip source. I did rename it there. Clip has clip source. Clip source is in, right now this clip has its own clip source is inside of itself, which is a movie reference. And then that is where my file path is actually stored. I'll kind of talk about why I think that's important to get all the way down to that sort of file asset level with these custom custom components. But so that's, I got a file, the clip uses the file, the clip plays in the video, in the player. So I should be able to drop this onto my player, and it's going to work there. And then the player takes that data, typically directly as a parameter chop, and pulls it all down, and then sends the right stuff to the engine, right? And that's where your movie in op is getting driven, and that kind of thing. So this also pertains to UIs, though, right? So let's go. This little playhead is a little UI object, but it can connect to anything because it has a source comp parameter, and this guy is meant to take players. What's kind of cool about this, and that's another reason that I want to espouse this stuff, is so let's just make that big so you can see it. This is a really dumb, simple playback object or playback UI. I could drag any one of my players onto it, and now it starts controlling that player, right? This is the most basic player. It doesn't even have a movie player. It's just to control a timer. But I can also, so here's that big sequence, right? Oh, I don't even have the UI exposed. This big editor, right, in the end is actually just a player UI, which has a source comp parameter. So I can give that, I have this big sequence player component down here. This same little dinky transport player can take my sequence as a source. Let's split the other way. And at that point, this tiny little guy can now play back this huge sequence, but it's the same, all the same controls: play, pause, start, reset, scrub, all that stuff, right? So that's really important. You can have these different UIs, and they can connect to different components, and within a certain tolerance of sort of family, they can connect to different styles of that component. So that's another part of this, maybe this new hierarchy is a little bit of an object-oriented model of I can have a really dumb player that all it does is control a timer. I have another slightly more complex player that controls a movie, and then I have a thing that controls a whole sequence. But I can represent those in all these different ways with these UIs simply because I've built it so that I can just connect with these component parameters. So I don't, how many, are any of you guys using this kind of workflow where you connect components with other components? Yeah. I think it's the way to go. It's the way forward. It's the only way we're going to be able to share our things together, right? If I say, I have a 10-track sequence, you know, and it's an hour long, and it's full of all these things, and it percolates up to the top to my one event comp, and I want to share it with you. And as long as you've sort of designed a player, or we've worked together with a player, maybe your player does something different, but in the end, all the first thing we do to connect it is with this component, and there's varying levels of how that should happen, right? Different use cases. Configuration, right? This is a configuration use case where I don't need the best performance right now while I'm editing sequences to... Can I do this? Haha. Oh, wow. Hold on. Open UI. Player. Yeah, this little op browser is nice. You can drag it as if it was a network. Right, so I just dragged and dropped a new sequence onto my editor because my editor has this source comp parameter. But in that case, right, I'm just configuring. I don't need the most perfect load. But some people may say, well, if you use this model to in Playback, right, and you need perfect playback, and you need to load, you need to have something running, and then you got to be able to give it a new sequence and expect that it's going to preload that and then crossfade over to it when it's ready. But you still want to use this model where you're just changing that one parameter. Well, that's going to require maybe a little bit of work under the hood, where you might. I have done this in the past where I change that source comp. But under the hood, I'm actually still keeping track of my last one, and then I bring that new one in and do a loading process, and then crossfade over to it when I'm ready. But on the outside, it sure is nice to still see that this is just, that's what I asked it to load, and that the parameter execute or whatever that reacts to that source, that comp change, is what kicks off that process. That's one way to do it. But that's, that's why I think it's so important to start to get into that process, because these sorts of fancy big UIs and these sorts of nested, lovely hierarchical browsing opportunities really come from sticking to that workflow where things connect to other things with comps, not with wires, and preferably with the fewest kind of number of these connections. I haven't thought it through completely, but for instance, inside of this sequence player is what you're going to see, as maybe most of you have come across, is down, down, down is the ping pong thing, right? The players that have to, the one loads and then the other one goes, and then the other one goes and the other one goes. And these things are a little more complex, and they connect to multiple things, right? They have a source comp in my world, but they also have a thing inside of them and a thing that controls them and other things that they need to access. And that's where maybe the nitty-gritty engine stuff still is kind of connecting to things, but here's the important thing. It's still connecting to those things with these parameters. This guy has a parameter that says, who is my core, right? This is a movie playing core, but over here is an audio playing core, right? Which currently it doesn't have anything in its sequence. But because I have this parameter, this allows us to have a little bit of modularity in that maybe that core is actually one of your generative components, right? And it needs to live somewhere else, but we can still connect to it and kind of still utilize the engine of this playback, which has a timer in it and clipping and stuff like that. So those are the important things that I think I hope everybody can get on board with, because that's how we're going to be able to share this stuff. It's also a way to, it's like bringing a little bit of that object-orientedness. Keith, we were talking about that. I think this is like an abstraction in a way of that concept where you have, as long as this guy is working, then this guy can connect to it. If there's a problem, then it's a bug in this guy because this guy's not getting what he needs, kind of thing. So let's back up a bit then, and maybe I'd like to maybe just try to tell a little bit of a story of how to get to that big, crazy, multi-track kind of opportunity by starting at the most simple one, which is this little player. And in the world that I'm working in, and I think Jarrett mentioned this last night, and others have been hinting at it, that there's a notion of a package system coming, and I spoke with Ivan a little bit about that, and I've been working on one based on if you look under the hood of widgets or TD Ableton, you'll see something like this, a brewing. And I've taken some of that just for my own development purposes and started working to that model. And what's cool is, I think at an advanced level, like most of us are, we should think about our feature set as a package of components that can then be distributed into networks and updated. And they may or may not have central resources that go back to that package. There's opportunities to kind of lock out a sort of a stranded component out in a deployed network and say, hey, this really works, I don't want the new version. But how much extensions is everybody here using? Do you guys know extensions at all? Yeah? You should get with them. They're good. It's easy. I mean, just if you, I can't dive into that tutorial here, but it's really easy to extend a component with the component editor, and it gives you a great rubric to start with. The next level of that is, at least when I'm developing, is that I typically bring that extension to a central place, and then I select it into my component. How many people work like that? Colin, David. And you guys like to do that as opposed to reference the extension. So if the comp is here, there might not even be a dat select in it. You just go for it at the central place. You do that, David? Okay. And you guys do? Manipulating the class. That sounds like some dangerous business right there. Does it? Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I do it the selection method pretty much always. So there's always in my components, there's a select. Yeah. So let's look this little player. So this is on my right pane. This is the source, the master component for the bass player in my little package, right? So I have a little local, like a bass that keeps this stuff. And this kind of has everything I need. This guy, TD update system, will go away and become something different that we all get to use eventually for these kinds of applications. But here's all the code that is utilized. And in my case, well, I think Jarrett would like this, but I'm actually referencing a package parameter, which is a reference up in this component. Oh, not that. No. This component has a little set of common parameters that kind of are common to the whole family of the package, right? And one of those is what the package is. And that is a global ops shortcut. And Jared, I think we agree on this, but this is really probably the only use of global ops shortcuts that anybody should be using, is to get back up to your, not even resources for your project, but resources for your deployment of tools, right? If you have a project, say, and the structure of this project is at the root, there are these packages, and then I start my system. And so in any system now, I have a bunch of stuff at the top, but it's all these packages. None of those packages run in the system. They're templates for what happens inside, and then everything else happens in the system. And I actually call it sysroot now up here. This isn't a good example, but I have all my packages, and then I have sysroot. And then in there, I might have multiple projects, actually, and I might have other useful things that are pertinent to my thing. But the point is global ops shortcuts are really only for this kind of thing, because if you, in your project, right, I'm sure somebody has come across this, where if you're like, clip library, op.clip library, or op.osc input, or whatever, right? You've broken everything, because the second you need another clip library, you've written all this stuff that goes op.clip library, and you're screwed, right? But if you have, yeah, exactly, yeah. But if you know you might have two clip libraries or whatever, your whole project might need to use a clip library, then have a component parameter on top of your project, and then everybody in your project goes up to that project, looks for the clip library that it's being referenced for that whole project. And then if you need project 2 with another clip library, then you can do that. But if you have op.clip library, eventually it will be all over. So in a pinch, yeah, sure, but I don't know if my guys are here, Max is here, but I slapped their wrist on a project recently where they were like, oh, global ops shortcuts, that's so cool. I was use them everywhere, and I couldn't even. I was trying to figure out why it would break. I was trying to be like, that's a really bad idea, don't do it. I can't exactly tell you why. And then, as we're working through it, it's like, oh, that's why. You had to copy that, or you had to make a duplicate of this whole system. And so anyways, that's just a tangent. I believe, and I think in these best practices, and of course, you don't have to do this, but this is the use for global opt shortcuts, really, is packages and maybe some of that sys stuff, right? Opt.td modules, I think, is something. Some of the stuff that's lurking in the hidden /sys area, right? Okay, that's not a bad way. Yeah, yeah. There's probably, like, for instance, in this, I think and this is a nice thing, in my sequence packet, sequence tools and media tools. Sorry for the errors. There's some support infrastructure. For instance, let's go to a clip again. Here, my big file library. So I like the idea of saving these file references that store the movie parameters, right? Length, rate, resolution, does it have audio? Useful things that if you were, say, orphaned from your media library, you actually still have all the data necessary to configure something. Well, right, the only way to get that right now is to bring in a movie op, cook it, and get that info, right? Yeah. Yeah. And that's it, but I don't know, you could test the theory of whether there should not be anything cooking in these places or not. I haven't gotten that strict, because yeah, like in this case, I have a set of movie and audio in operators that I basically reuse to get this data, right? I just like, refresh information of this file path, and it goes and cooks that guy. It's certainly not always cooking though, but but it is an interesting discussion of how to have it. I do, in fact, on some of my systems, in fact, I've had to do it on the last number of projects. On start, when I'm in runtime or show mode, or whatever, I use the batch script to put it in a particular mode. If it launches in that mode, I will cook off the whole package. Right, because I've already got in this case, there's nothing I need to run the show in that package anymore. Everything's deployed out in the system, but there are things like you can see that there's a timer just sitting there cooking. Right, timer chops pretty much always cook, and I use a lot of timer chops in these things, and so I have to have them in those template components. But essentially, I just bypass the whole package, or at least the comps part of it, right? Because if I middle click here, there's stuff going on in there. And the only way to stop that stuff going on is to go all the way down and tell all these timers to deactivate, and I don't even know if that stops them cooking. It does, okay. Good. So anyways, this op shortcut is found on these components. Now, I can't, I was shown where this is going, and I love it. So it's going to be a little deeper than what I've got, but the concept is the same. Most of these components that are allowed to live out in your project need to have some data to get back to this package, whether for runtime use, whether they need resources out of the package, or for this ability to update them. So we have a package parameter here that tells us about that. And then down under the hood, we are referencing that parameter. I've maybe gotten in the bad habit. I I suppose I should stick with it, but in a lot of these, I've been just doing my global shortcut to get back to my modules. Because I'm designing the package, that's what it's called. It's the only one that you're ever going to have. But maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot. I don't know. So that's probably, maybe that's the better way to do it. And an even better way to do it would probably be, well, oops. I think I might have not given this the right, yeah. There's a discussion there too. Main, player, parent shortcuts, right? Get up to my parent, find its package, go to the modules base of there and get, and this is something I've found very useful, get me.name. Because then you can kind of, if you know your modules names and you're building something, you just put a select with this kind of expression and then you can change it. Because I actually do that quite a bit. So I have, and I'll talk a little further about this, but this is already an inherited thing. This is a module that is the sort of base class of the entire package. And this is a module that is the base class of all players. And then if I go to a more complex player, I've got the same, in fact, this is a clone of the base player's little local base comp. But then out here is an extension that is going to inherit that base class. But what I've found useful is if, say, I'm starting to make a, maybe I need to come up with a different player, I can start with this sort of template. And if I know I've got a new, and I'm making a new module, then I can say like this, right? And then I've a new module for this might start here. And now I have I can start class, making a new class, and it's, I don't know, I find it kind of nice to just do that me.name thing for these modules. But this is the example, right? I select everything into these components. One reason that's nice is, and I think given this, what will be this upcoming update system, is I can pretty quickly, when this stuff is deployed, is replace these selects with the text of the module, right? I have a little system that'll go find all the selects that are selecting into my modules folder, and just say, hey, just give yourself a text stat and copy all the text of that module in it, every one of them, and now that's a standalone guy, right? But in development, when I'm testing and I've got 5 of them out in the project, I do want to be programming all of them at the same time. So I think that's that's another maybe decent argument for don't go back to your package with your extensions, but I could be wrong about that. I'm sorry, there is one use case. I have a thing that I've, like my little common utilities package, or it's really just a module that has functions that I've found useful. And that gets imported into almost everything, just like TDF does typically. And that's in one place. I'm not going to copy that into every component. There was an actual functional reason back if you're using storage, and it's particularly the storage manager that gets kind of put into your extension by default, that has to have a local module that the extension came from. Does that make sense? I believe the way that the storage manager works, it has to know that that class came from the module associated with the extension on the component. So if you have one module and 5 components, and your extension parameter is going to here to get the module, and you're using that storage manager in it, it's going to break, I believe. That's what Ivan told me. But I don't really use that storage all that much anymore. Yeah. Let's delete this and this. So anyways, let's look at this player a little bit more. This little player has some nice stuff. Sorry, I'm going into my spiffy dev thing, which some of you might find cool. I'm in my player, and this is a select at, and I'm working off disk for the most part now with these modules, so I have a little drag and drop that'll will open my text editor with the local file, like the actual on-disk file, right? I think that's less needed now with that sync to file thing, because you can just and it's all in there. I thought it was cool. Anyways, so this player has a big extension that has what I consider to be kind of the most base level things for a player. And remember, this player does nothing other than have a timer comp in it, or timer chop that you can start. And that's about it, right, from here. If you had a UI connected to this, then you'd have a good way to run the scrubbing commands. But how is that done? This base class has a lot of the most basic stuff. Get to frame, get to seconds, get to fraction, play, pause, reset. That's pretty much it. There's some mechanics stuff that I don't really want to dive into because it could all change. But I do believe in some way, shape, or form that most of this stuff has a very good reason to be based around the timer chop. And I think that anything that we have to complain about and features that we need, we should keep asking to conform or adapt the timer chop to help us, because that keeps everything generalized, right? If we're controlling movie ins directly, then we have to control audio ins slightly differently directly. Yeah, for playing. And that's a great point to make, that while this is happening, we should inform that, because in a way, what Jarrett's saying, which really is music to my ears, is a lot of what I'm doing will be superseded by the fact that these ops will have essentially, see this little thing, player mechanics that almost every one of my players has. That's just a wrapper around a timer chop. Yeah, this stuff. Yes. Yeah, the core. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a look at the structure of the more complex player that I have. Right, there's mechanics and core. And what Jarrett is kind of saying is these may become merged into one op, right, where an audio, a movie, we have to talk about like channel playback and stuff like that. But like, could all those ops actually merge these sentiments and have that control within each other? Because in the end, yeah, this player, right, has initialize, play, start, reset. I don't expose scrubbing stuff in custom parameters. I'd rather just make UIs for that. But these are all going to have those common needs.
Specifically with the timer chop, how do you deal with scrubbing the timer chop?
Mm-hmm.
I've had good success with scrubbing when I'm controlling from an arbitrary, like 0 to 1 scrub to your thing, but like actually trying to tell the timer chop where to go and then have it adapt. I've never gotten that to work.
What do you mean have it adapt?
So I have a scrub knob and I just tell the timer chop to go somewhere, but I'm sending it lots of updates. It doesn't seem to respond properly. Or have you ever run into anything like that?
So that's
it's more than like a single cue. That's like closer to continuous scrubbing.
I mean, that's what that's what's happening here. Are you talking about in a performance context? So this is me. I'm sending a go-to. Essentially, I'm sending a go-to seconds command to a timer right now. I think that's a great.
So like, if you have like LTC in,
Yes.
you're trying to override the timer chop.
Uh,
At some point, the timer should just like step back and act as like a dummy interface for everything that's already connected to the timer.
Yeah.
If you're like overriding with LTC.
So yeah, external control. I actually have that. I have a little place where I'm putting kind of RFEs that we might come up with. In the time base, right? Greg's kind of thing. He has a place where he has his scenes, and then he's actually got one scene that plays another scene, and it's just represented by one bar in his timeline, but it's actually referencing another scene. And that is, right, in these scenes, I wanted to show you guys like my, because it's similar, right? Here's that big sequence is a timer with 12 parallel segments, right? That's how I do these timers. I build a table I build it out of op finds to give me the beginning, the length, and the end of every element. And so does Greg. So does that time-based thing. And when he selects in that scene into his other scene, every frame he's running a go-to based on the incoming where it should be, and he's saying go to. And I was testing it, and it seemed, and that was driving off big sequence like this. It seemed all right, but it doesn't seem quite right to me. And maybe you're telling me that you've actually experienced problems doing that. I think with external, like real external LTC or sync and stuff like that, that's another discussion because there's more going on there in my mind. Locally in touch, as long as you're performing well, I think it's all right. But I think it's a great RFE, and I think it would go with Jarrett. It should be an RFE for all of these modern timers. Is how do we easily externalize the control? Like, let a timer subcomponent get driven by another ramp or something. Yes, yeah. Yeah, and that's totally where this discussion wants to go, because I have a sequence that's really only one level deep, right? It's allowed to have a bunch of events, and they all get built into one timer, and that's how it kind of works well, is that all the offsets are built into this guy. And then everybody gets these sort of IDs to select when they're going to play and when they're ping-ponging and all that stuff. But I really do want to be able to say, take one of those whole big things and put it in another whole big thing. And at that point, you kind of need to drive timers with timers in not just a one shot, not just a hey go, but like I need to be in lockstep with you at an offset. Yeah. So I think that's a great problem that we have to confront. But yeah, David. Yeah. Sorry, now we're going to jump all over for a bit, so I hope that's cool. What I did was these event assets that I've come up with have a local, and this is actually, you might like this, David, I think. Every one of them has it, right? They have a cloned local. And this is where I can start to think about the nesting a little more. But in here is where I'm grabbing event data gather. And that is a little messier than I'd like it to be, but it starts with an op find. And this might be another, I don't know, hot feature tip if anybody's not on this bandwagon. But and this is a very advanced use of it. But you guys know how with an op find, you can stuff custom columns into it. So you can specify a list of columns that you're going to add to your op find, and then you can run to go get those things. for the purposes of my use, I actually do that in my central package extension, in my management extension. I give the op find that list, and then I give it the whole set of data per op that it finds. Mainly because it was getting pretty complex. So I'll pull that extension up, David, so you can see it. Yeah, so I give them, this is all the stuff that I provide the op find. Some of it is actually probably I should comb out. And then anyways, I have a function to get all of that. Here, get data entry. And mainly because there's going to probably be a bunch more logic, like if it's this, then give it this. If it's this, make sure to give it this kind of type, because in this creating this table of segments, and this is an important point too for playback purposes and for this data model is, and I think can eventually get absorbed under the hood of all this, but this little event that's parsing all these clips and making the segments table, this kind of needs to be all the data required for that player to kind of boot up quickly in playback, right? Because there is some expense in going out and finding, like if I have a sequence that has this many clips, I don't want to really do an op find on load, right? Because that is a hit. There is some processing going on there. So part of the point of these event assets is to make sure they've parsed and prepared the data necessary for the player to launch without finding it itself, right? After it's started going, the player is still still has comp connections as it's going, right? It goes, okay, first clip, next clip, next clip, next clip, loading, and it's being fed comp parameters, but those are listed in here, right? So that segment stat. They do, and that's another good, see here, there's this cross order column that's kind of blank right now. That's what happens in this network is by the end of this parsing, I've taken all my clips and I've decided what their cross order is going to be. So it's not happening in playback. I've decided what that ping pong is going to be ahead of time. That's what allows me to scrub around in the player a little more effectively, because in the past, and I'm sure maybe people who've done this before have had to do this, right? You got a thing playing, and then you want to preload the next thing, and then you're going to flip to it, right? But if it's a sequence, it's multi-tracked, and something like base nectar, where I'm going to get an indeterminate, I don't know when it's coming, jump ahead. That's a very good use case for something that maybe is a little more on its feet, in that if I was on A and then I got the jump ahead, I got to preload B and get to it, or vice versa. In this place right now, I'm not doing that. I'm hard setting what the A, Bs are. So if I add another clip in here, that cross order column is going to change because it's it just stitched in, and we could probably do that and see it happen. Oh, I can't split a floater. Oh, here we go. But this is nice because I every once in a while I find that the op find needs a kick. But why don't I just add another clip? I think I'm allowed to do this. And let's just go, yeah. So I added clip 10, and there it is. And so the cross order, I don't know quite how to, let's see if we look at the parameters here for clip 10. And what I could probably do is, as I change its start time, I'm going to watch it move up and down that, right? Because somewhere in here I'm sorting by time, right, which has to inform that cross order. So their clip 10 is eventually going to move down to the bottom of that tracks time sort, right? And that's maintaining, actually the cross order column doesn't change at all because whoever's next is going to be the next and the next and the next, so yeah. Exactly. I have a what? Oh, I'm bootstrapping the concept of local from 077 and everything for my own purposes now. I don't use it. Yes, it's local, but local doesn't matter that much anymore. I could put variables in there if I want. I'm just using it for my own purposes. That might be bad. I don't know. I mean, my local is a clone of my original event comp. I'm not using vars like T-script vars or anything. It's questionable whether that should be called local, I would say. Just because of confusing people like David or who know what it means. But if I added local time, that's probably something, I guess in a way I'm saying, no, like this is the local for this kind of component. Yeah. Yeah, yes, that's true. But I would never do that. In a way, that's preventing anybody from getting in there and doing that. This is a local, okay, that's very, this is an asset comp that I call an asset comp, which is mostly to store and prepare data for use. And then in my system comps, I have a thing called syslocal. Maybe this should just be called syslocal. Yes, well that's so in there. So I don't know. It's a discussion, right? Back in I don't know a few months ago, I was very diehard about my assets don't have anything in them other than other assets and parameters, and it's just data storage, so that I can save out a really clean, small talks, right? And then I kind of started going the other way because, God, it's useful to have this kind of interactivity, right? Oh, I'm going to trim. Well, let's expose those parameters, right? I can really only do that if I have an extension. And then at that point, I might as well do some other things in here. So this little local, right, and every one of these guys has it, is more for like the fact that this component is not a built-in touch feature, so I can't hide anything from you. I guess I could hide this, but these are the necessary things for this little asset to function in life, in use. And yeah, one of those things is actually having to go into all of its children and do an op find and basically provide this data for the sequence. Oh, on these?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so I don't know, there's some architectural thoughts there. I'm pretty into this now. I kind of happened on it a couple of weeks ago, like this notion of system comps, asset comps. They both have extensions. An assets extension is more about making it usable like this, right? These kinds of things. Parameter executes that kind of make this UI a little more usable without having to build a UI for an asset. Because I still want, the primary purpose is to store all this information in parameters, which is something we haven't actually really all said we're on the same page with, but like, I hope we are, right? Because I can save a talks of this sequence right now, and it's got everything in it, and if a user opens it up, or a somewhat advanced user, they can go and start editing parameters. And anything I've decided they shouldn't edit, I've made read-only or disabled. And it's another one of those things where I'm saying, I'm proclaiming that we should use those things that Derivative has given us to make life easier, like custom parameters for storing sort of user-entered data, as opposed to DATs, or anything like that. Maybe there's still a use case, like you might need a matrix or something that has to be stored, and that's another reason why these assets, you'll notice, are not clones, because there might, and if you develop an asset, it might need an icon or just some special thing that was part of the asset that does need to get saved. That's a touch operator. That would save when you toxed it or whatever. So like in this case, this asset, this sequence, right, which is represented, which we can represent with that editor. Sorry, maybe we can take a break in a second too here. Right, this is a lot. There's a lot of work in sequence 3 here, and within every one of these, there's some kind of user-defined. I chose the movie, right? I chose if I'm gonna stretch it or trim it, all this stuff, and it's really like this is. I've got operators on the road who make these decisions, and they need to save it, and I also hate saving all this stuff, like I'd rather have a system that's going to load this tox up with all this data, as opposed to making an XML or writing out a CSV or anything like that. It's like we've got a pretty good data format in the form of custom parameters that has a lot of the data types that are most useful: strings, floats, ints, all that, toggles, and so that's what these asset comps are. And I guess what I was getting at was I think it's okay now to have a little bit of this infrastructure in here for now, because in a sense what we're really doing is prototyping features we eventually maybe want to see get turned into something that doesn't have to have all that stuff, but that's my hope. So yeah, I think maybe, I don't know, what time is it? I'd like to have a bathroom, and then I can gather my thoughts about other things to show you, or gather requests of things to dive into a little more. I think I'm gonna try to keep going if y'all want to. So I'm sorry that I don't have anything to give you guys to like try this stuff out with, but since I was kind of made aware of the package stuff and all that, I really want to adapt to that before letting it out. But I think with all the advent of all the new kind of Git stuff that's going to happen soon, and it's going to be a nice way to collaborate on this. All of this is something I fully intend to put out there, and you know, I want it to be worked on, because, well, I mean, look, I've had some success after, you know, some patience and some perseverance at seeing some pretty awesome features come into Touch that have made our lives really great, and I think this is a good example of one that everyone's got to kind of weigh in on a little bit, and we can, and I liked, and that's why the talk about the data model is so important, right? Because in a way, this is prototyped with custom components and extensions, and you come up with the base level data model of, okay, I need start time, I need length, I have to have these kind of options, I have to be able to parent in this way, I need this data at the end to inform an engine, a timer engine, and you get it working really good. It might be the only thing you have to do eventually is to just go and replace all your capital parameters with not capital parameters, right? But the you know, that's kind of the idea, is are there some things that can be agreed upon? So I wanted to show I wanted to make sure to, you know, I give some insight into little techniques of mine that I think could be helpful now for people building things like this in the interim. So I know I mentioned that this whole notion of these assets, right? And that I still have my sort of core asset for media management is a file reference, and that is what allows us to do things like make these nice big tables of what is all our media looking like, but it also lets us. Let's see if I can sort this correctly. So that keeps happening. I close that window and it pops back. You guys know that project.paths. Project.paths. Does anybody know this? No one? No one knows project.paths? Well, let me stop these errors from popping up in my janky sequences that are running right now. Pause. I think these sequence players are breaking. Project.paths is a dictionary of keyed shortcuts for drive locations. And it can be used not as an expression, but in this way, with this the UNC style shortcut. So you can swap out. It's really useful for moving to different systems. Right, I define my media directory, and then if I move over to my laptop at home that has a G drive instead of a D drive or whatever, or I've got my Dropbox, you know the deal, and then I can update project.paths, and as long as all my referenced media is using one of those shortcuts, I just update the shortcut, right? So that's just done by, so I'm going to break my stuff right now. Project.paths media equals, let's just say E : not media. Okay. So now let's do, what am I doing? Okay. Yeah, so this is a big opfind-based lister of all my media, and I don't have the function immediately available to me, but if I have a little button that refreshes individually, and you notice that now I have a little flag in my file references. Let's go to the actual parameters for this guy, for one of these guys. Right, like I had mentioned before, it's really useful to store information about my assets so that I don't have to access that asset to get that information anymore. As well as, so I just updated from a single one, and this went and tried in my little engine to load that up with my kind of central movie op, and it immediately said, oh, it didn't work. And so it didn't change any of these because I don't want to, right, I probably want to know about that movie since I had the information at one point, but it did change this flag here, file found. And that allows me in this big list to go and hunt for broken things. But as well, and so this is another big thing that everybody doing this sort of stuff should know, other way, is that the lister, the kind of modified lister component that you can find in the palette can do this kind of stuff. And it's really, really, really the way for big management stuff that you might need, right? Until the lister was around, everybody was doing whatever their weird version of the table comp or the lister prior to it getting kind of beefed up in this way, or, God forbid, replicated stacks of stuff, component panels. But I've found this to be a super great way to manage a big chunk of media, right? And then in combination with tags, right? So now here's all my audio, only my movies, only the stills in here. There's no ST maps in here. And then as well, so this isn't going to work right now, but yeah, it won't even work. It tried to refresh this. Sorry, the button is gone, but this is supposed to be a. Oh, sorry, that's the refresh. Sorry, the viewer button, and then open up like a little mini player. So let's fix that path thing. Project.paths equals. One thing that's tricky about this this project paths shortcut thing is you really got to get the slash right. It won't take the other one, and yeah. And I think it's a little better. Now let's see if it worked. Yeah, that went away. So let's stop sorting by exists, and I'll sort by this key kind of thing. And yeah, so I got it back, and now I can do a little viewer. And this is an old floating playback tool, so those widgets are all busted, but super useful. So combining this with tagging and searching this, so I have a tag search, and then I have a key search, so I can get all the ones called circus something, right? Or all the VJ survival kit thing, or survive. I don't know what they're called, I guess. Or yeah, this data overlays stuff, right? Here's all my cool little glitchy, twitchy, whatever things. I think this is a stretchy thing, yeah. Yeah. So this is really useful, and I can dive a little bit into this if people think it's cool for a second, just so you kind of maybe get a basic view of the structure. And then I'm going to show you another thing that I do, because gosh, how the hell, like this is that, how did I get all those assets in there without hand copying and all that stuff? I've got a couple things that would be part of this little package that you point to a root folder, and then you say go through that and recreate that folder structure in my assets library using base comps and asset comps to represent all the files of certain types that you want in your library, right? And then once you have that, you'd have access to this thing. So that little browser is based on an op-find, and it's using a similar technique. Sorry, the first thing it does is it connects somewhere in here. Oh, this was back in the day when I was calling it main comp. Source comp, main comp. This is pointing to another asset called what I'm calling a media library. And you should be able to have multiple media libraries, right? This is not a top-level thing. You could have a media library per sequence, right? So that if you have a sequence that's got 15 clips, you might want to always have its little media library right with it. But you could have one big core one or whatever. Anyways, it's just my thought for storing files, clips, and sequences kind of together. So this browser is meant to connect. Oops. Man, that was operator snippets for comps. There we go. This browser is designed to connect to a media library asset. So, but there's not anything very special about that, other than there's some buttons on there that would tell that, like the little refresh button that I was hitting is actually going to call a command back. Sorry that it doesn't have an icon, but that's going to call a command to that media library, right? Because this is a UI into another thing, and it's the other thing that does stuff. The UI just tells you to do stuff, right? So the media library has the refresh command, and then the individual clip has the refresh command. the top level thing. Yeah. 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 So even though I have a notion of all the stuff that's inside of that media library, I'm still asking, first I say, hey, media library, refresh this clip. And then it can decide whether that clip has an extension and say, hey, clip, refresh yourself. Because that's what would allow me to point this browser to multiple media libraries, right? If I have to have a few different segmented media libraries. Anyways, it's pretty simple, I think. An op find is the start. And then I am doing some custom column fetching to get all this stuff, right? All the file path, file found, new version, type, length, rate, blah, blah, blah. And then almost all these are just parameter calls to those things, right? So they all have file path, is the file found, media type, length, rate, resolution, has audio, all that stuff. So this is in preparation to feed the lister, which is this big guy. So can I get a beat on who's got any experience with not this lister, not the one here, but the one here. Is it in UI? Lister. This lister. Yeah. So at its base level, I mean, I'll have to say there's some pages and tutorials about this, and they're pretty good. It's it's somewhat dry stuff, but you can find good examples I think in widgets and in the op browser, which is an example of a tree, a hierarchical lister. But the important thing to know about the lister, about this souped up lister that Ivan has sort of toiled over and given lots and lots of functionality to, is that you can edit what the columns are, where they get their data from, and you can do custom callbacks for clicking on any column, any row, dragging. You can drag them around, right? So this is I don't think the one I made is currently draggable, but here this is an example of you can do stuff like this. You can drag lists into lists, right? So this is in my base nectar system. These are representative of things, options you might have for something or other, and then I need to associate them with other things. So that's a lister, that's a lister. But also, like, that button is just based in the lister, and a callback for it when I launch it will open my editor and scope it to the song that I need to edit. It's like, oh, this is busted because the playhead is off. Right, so lister law just opens up a lot of this kind of stuff. What is this? This one has, this is a good example of kind of lots of use cases, but let's see. I can drag from this list over to here. I can add things to this list. So anyways, I can't go through like a full introduction to how this works, but so you guys kind of maybe can know what to look for if you want to make your own. There is a set of callbacks. Ivan has made a nice little pulse button here that can open your callbacks. And at its, shoot, I need to drink something. There aren't many when you open it. There's nothing. There's a little bit of a sample. And the important thing to know is that info is a concept that is being used a good deal. That info is a dictionary that gets passed to the callback. And I'll show you the callbacks for this guy, which are much more beefy. I just have to get down to the actual list. Edit callbacks. So they work by so the callbacks are built sort of dynamically by what you call your columns, and then at any point you can create in this callbacks thing. You can create an on click, an on hover, an on drop, various other ones, and then you can append the name of your column after that, and that would scope to what happens when I click. What happens when I click this button, or can I even call it a button? You can define it as a button. If I click here, so these obviously open parameters and the little viewer and stuff like that, but it's all done with these callbacks. So like on click, oh yeah, here's an easy one. On click parameters, I get the info. Typically when you're first starting out, you're going to need to debug that info so that you know what the info is, but it's a big kind of nested dictionary of all the stuff about that piece of data you just clicked on. And one of those pieces of data is this, get row op. I made a little thing. Anyways, eventually you can get down to to a path, like say you had a, typically in that thing you're going to need to define a path to one of these file reference assets or something, and that's going to always be what you get back to it with. So in this case, I'm just opening the parameters of it. But like the refresh, you can see I'm calling another, I'm basically saying, hey UI, I'm clicking this, and I'm sending you the op that's associated with it. And then UI main is my big browser, and that's typically going to say, hey, library I'm connected to, I've been asked to refresh this clip, and then it'll give it to the actual sequence library to handle that. But I think this is super useful, and then I've done a few things on the outside of it to do scoping, so like the tag filtering. And then I think embedded in here is another search term which takes a bound field and does just a dat search with some added wildcards to make sure you can make sure it's not too restrictive in terms of how you search. So this searches that searches this file key column, but then this does tags, and then but they're combined, right? So there's only one audio file that has the word over in it and is audio, right? So I highly recommend the lister. I think it's necessary for all of this stuff. You can see a more, even a more advanced version of that here. And actually, this isn't, I didn't do anything. I took the op browser component, like I said, and I turned off all the other features because there's like a parameter viewer, an op viewer, a little header, all that stuff. And so this under the hood, if I F10 into here, is actually a fully fledged Ivan Dussel op browser. But I've just got all of the other junk turned off, which, yeah, it's kind of all, if you guys look at that op browser component, it has a par comp, it has a op viewer, right? It's essentially a way to look at your network in an outline view. But it also, and this goes back to, if you build in this way with components that are nested that have tags, you can get tree browsing for free. Like I see all the clips that are in that sequence in an outline view. If I put things inside of these, I can get another branch of the tree inside of this branch, right? So that's like what this big puppy is all about as well, right? I actually have to use it in this fashion in my little base nectar system quite a bit, just because I know what I'm looking for. These are songs. This is a kind of a different use case, but there's a song, and then the song has its cues, it has its layer routing definitions, it has lighting information, it has the actual sequence here, and then the sequence has all these nested things. And it's quite useful to just go this way. Oh yeah, tags. Have to use tags with all of this. Must. Tags. Use them. I've been getting pretty crazy with tags. I'm trying things out. I think I made a really big mistake in this go around where I was using asterisks, and then I realized that wildcards, and it's not good. But I use like dollar signs and ats to mean some things, and I also put colons into tags to delimit them into like categories, right? This was something I wanted to talk about. I think I said I would talk about, and didn't have time to dial it up. A couple other touch guys, Itzard and Tim, helped me via Keith actually on a tagging system for more like user subjective tags like color, blue, speed, fast, music style, dubstep, whatever, where you can actually put like colons into your tags, and then you could have essentially a limitless hierarchy of categories and tags. And it works. Find children and opfind get through tags real fast. Like it doesn't chug that bad, even if you're doing that kind of parsing and stuff, and wildcards and everything. Well, I highly recommend it for all kinds of uses. At some point with some of this stuff, right, there's a different way to identify a type of a thing, if it is really a built-in comp, or you can always expect it to have a certain parent shortcut, right? Then opfind and the find children function, which everybody should also be familiar with this kind of stuff, can look for those kinds of things as well. And then you can kind of, I kind of think when we get to a place like tags, maybe eventually become more of a user, not a user, like somebody who's inputting data into one of these big media systems wants to put their own tags in and sort with them. But right now, it's very useful for us as system builders to tag things. Because, for instance, like this UI is done that way. It starts with an opfind, and it's looking for clip assets. And then it can build this whole thing, right? So tags are really important for that as well. So to that, maybe we can look at that now. I did want, I can, it's not that, it's kind of dog and pony, but, so here's my video library. These are all representative of folders that were on disk, and then down in here I have comps that are my little reference guys. So I can kind of, if I do something like this, just to show you what I was trying to get at, if I switch this to an audio file and update it, I made it go green so it kind of represents what you normally see as an audio guy, and stuff like that. But as well, I've got, let's see if this doesn't break everything, but so if I just wipe this thing out, oops. I've made a function that is essentially supposed to go into that root folder, look at the folder structure, and build bases for every folder, and then for every file it brings in a reference. And basically you can kind of rebuild your on-disk media library without too much trouble. So there it is. And then, so you can just see media music, video, all these folders. Here's all these folders. Right, but even cooler, or I don't know if it's cool, right? Here's the op browser. Double click into the sequence library, and then there's everything I brought in. And look, it kind of looks like a Windows browser with all those folders and stuff. So kind of nice. And then you can kind of kickstart your media library that way. This isn't scoped to only be those things, so it's showing some of the stuff I wouldn't want to show you on this browser. But okay, so I'll just look at maybe this real quick, so you can get a little bit of. Well, I don't know if it's. I think people are into this. Like, I know everybody wants these damn timelines right now. So there's ways you can build this. It's working pretty well for me. I will put something. I will give it out. But I'll probably do it in a pretty abstract form, so people can just do it as kind of get some ideas from it and use it as you need. But my goal is still trying to work on the bigger picture. But anyways, I mean, this works because of all the stuff we've already gone over. Be kind of rigid, sticking to these asset comps, and having certain parameters on them. As well, I've learned a decent amount from some of what Greg did in that time-based project of his. A big one is this notion of computed start, end, and length. It's really damn useful to have these available as custom parameters. You notice they are not, they're read-only. They're really only used by the UI and the actual player engine. And they do come into that op find that made the timer table, the segment table. So first step in making this is an op find. Like usual. So inside of this editor, so the editor right now, I flip-flop on this. The editor itself is a base comp, and then inside of it, it has a UI. But then it also has some components that I'm using the internal parameter system a little bit right now, which is I found to be kind of useful because of shortened expressions. But I don't really want anybody out top seeing it. But anyways, somewhere in here, what I'm doing is I'm op finding all my events. Yeah. So I go to my player, which is already connected to the asset, the sequence, right? Because this UI connects to a player, it doesn't connect to a sequence. I think that is necessary because you have to connect to a player because you have to be able to play what you're seeing, right? You need to be driving a timeline to be able to edit this thing. So maybe that's one important, just like get it out of the way. The UIs for these sequences kind of have to be associated with a player. So you have to make a decision. Does your UI have a player inside of it, or do you just connect to a player and whatever thing that player is playing is what you're editing? Right? I don't know. It's a simple question, but maybe an important one. Yes. I mean, I personally don't support it in this right now. Yeah, I mean, that's a good, just on an infrastructural level, this is a very fragile system right now because I can do that. I can put a channel clip or an audio clip on a track that actually only has a video player right now. But that's the point, is right now, because this is very open-ended, there's a disconnect between the track data and the track playing. in a way, right? Track 1 is just track 1. Anything can be on track 1. But the player engine that parses all the things that are on track 1, and then if it gets an audio clip, it's going to throw an error right now because I've only got a video player on track 1. I've kind of been considering, though, that I could have a video player and an audio. I could have 4 video players on track 1 if I happen to have 4 videos on top of each other in track 1. I know it doesn't make any sense right now, but the point is these things should be configurable to what you need, because you might need a stereo playback system, right? And then you might need 2 videos or something. So right now, I've gone a couple different ways with this, but right now track, or here, I'll just select this guy. Track is defined as a parameter right now. So I can move this to track 2, and it'll just pop down to track 2. and when I do that, after the opfind refreshes, actually, funnily, look, it's playing 2 videos at once, because there are 2 video players in there. They're ping and pong, right? And it's telling them both to play right now. You're both up. So it kind of works. If I put another video on that in the same time space, it will not work anymore. So track is just a number, and that is applied in the player. So track determines which sort of playback track is actually going to ingest and try to play the clip. But that's it. It's not like, then it's up to you, system builder, down the line to say if that means track 1 is over track 2, or actually track 1 is the picture-in-picture for something else, or what, you know what I mean? So right now I'm defining track with a number. There's no reason, as if you come up with a sequence methodology, and I think I did this at the beginning. You could, here's the sequence in Compland. These, I happen to have organized these by what track I want them to be on, right? I could also make a new event in here, and it would do something like this. And I think this is kind of where I'm going in the end, or in the kind of future forward-lookingness of this talk. I don't have this kind of thing automated in this UI, but say I bring in a new event here, and it's just an event. It doesn't have a clip involved, and I give it, and I put you on track 1. Yeah. Well, so this is an event with some new parameters, with a clip, with definition of a clip. So this is a subclass of an event, I would say, is the clip. But I've also decided here that you can have a clip that is not in an event. Why? Because you need to have a clip. Many people need to have a clip library, right? Like in Ableton or in Resolume or something. You have clips. You could have 10 clips that reference the same source file, and they're different parts of that timeline of that source file, right? But that to you, that's a really important set of assets, is the intro, this loop, this stretched out part of this clip, right? And those are clips. But those could be considered part of your library. And then when you're building a sequence, you want to have access to those in your sort of palette of what you're building a sequence with. So I kind of decided that if you have an event, you can say, well, use a clip from my library and just place it in time by parenting it to this event. This parameter on the right pane that we have, right, this object that we have, is sort of a combination of that. This is maybe a bit confusing right now to be able to say this is an event and a clip, simply because it has both sets of parameters. What? A clip event. Yes, that's what it's called. Yeah, yes. It's a clip event. But what I don't want to get used to is that there's all these different kinds of events necessarily, because what I really want an event to be is a base comp for time, right? And I want to put kind of anything I want, including other events, in here, and then I want it to kind of parent to its time. Events have a start and an end. There's different ways to achieve those, and this is certainly up for debate, but this is kind of also pulled from Greg's ideas. You can start at he calls them elements, I think. So, yes, I agree, but that's where this gets a little tricky. I totally agree that a clip is not inherently placed in time. It's just a piece of time. And then when as the sequencer, you decide where to put it in time. So ideally, you would make a blank event and put a clip inside of it, or a clip reference, right? Because you might have a library, and then you need to select in from your library so that you can edit your library and know that your sequences that are based on clips in the library will update. It's a super fascinating part of the discussion. In my mind, what's going on right now is that this is, yes, a clip event, but really what it is I'm just saying I don't want the extra work of putting another thing and another thing and then another, because right now there's already a movie reference in here. You got me, because I could also, what I'm saying is you could consider this a hybrid object in that it is an event and it has a clip with it, but that clip is in the data model considered to be inside of this event. It's just that it happens to be pretty damn convenient to have them both on the same page. If the UI were all done, when you clicked an event and there was a clip inside of it, you would automatically it'd be like, oh, this event has a clip in it, so you probably want to edit the clip, right? Or you would essentially get a combination of this anyways, because once you're in your editor, what do you want to do? When I'm doing this, right, when I'm moving a clip around, I'm actually changing its event's start time, right? But if I go and edit the clip itself I don't know if I have anything good right now to show. Yeah, I think the trim will work, right? Will the trim work? Huh? Correct. Yes. No. That's yes. There. So there, I changed the time of the clip, and that was editing the clip inside of the event. But again, then this is changing that as well. Like you pointed out, Keith, and this is an important thing to agree on. This is set to the source's length, but now I can give the event, and I'm sorry, these things are adjusting as I change because all the ones after in time are set to follow the previous ones. So I know it looks weird that it's all expanding and contracting, but yes. So now I'm adjusting the length of the event, but the clip inside of it might only be 5 seconds. I've defined that clip. I want that clip to only be 5 seconds long, but now I'm opening up the event surrounding it to be longer than it. Really, really good example of this in use is Ableton, right? In the arrangement view of Ableton, you drop a clip, and then when you stretch it out, if that clip is set to loop, it just loop, 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 loop. I think that's something that we could all really use, and so that's inherent in here is loop, and then loop start, loop end, right? So you can have a different start. Yeah, and that actually isn't in here right now, but yes, you might want to ping pong or to, yeah.
So one big complaint about Ableton is that when you stretch the loop and then you need a gap and then you want to have another loop of the same clip, like once that is separated into
it's a different clip.
Events, it's a different clip, right? So a big, RFE for Ableton for years has been aliasing of clips. So I have a master clip and like all other things are referenced to that. So part of this model looks like it's very ripe for
That, yeah.
like integration that
Absolutely.
not a whole lot of timelines do very well.
Yeah. Well, and this would work, actually, an older version that I had would work that way. Right now, my thought was, if you have a clip event or a clip inside of an event, you should be able to use, so see how I have that notion of clip source? And I'm doing this a lot under the hood. I can put multiple things in there, and it adapts to what I've given it. So that clip source should be able to be one of my file refs. It could also be a file path. Yes. Yeah, something like that.
If you have a player associated with a track, then your kind of tracks are your different data types, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it tied like that?
Well, no, I guess what I'm getting at is that should be up to the final implementer, and so this system has no notion of track and data type being associated. Track is still just an integer, so the type is all in the clip, right? You give it, if the clip is given a certain source, now it's a channel clip, now it's an animation clip, now it's an audio clip, now it's a video clip. And that would determine, like if this were more robust and I double clicked on this and I might get another editor to edit the clip, that would determine what editor I get and what type of thing that is. And then down the line, you can start to make those rules. Track 1 has to be video, so if you drag a audio clip onto track 1, don't let the user do that. Okay, that's what I was getting at, I think, was you can decide that for yourself. So here's what I was getting at. I brought down a new event in here, and what I was going to try is I was going to just take all of these and put it in here, right? And then call this track 1, right? This is still an event, okay? And it's got track 1, and now I'm just going to give all these, I'm going to just say parent.track or whatever, yeah. Yeah. So I've just sort of said, okay, I have tracks, I'm going to call this a track, but it's actually just it's an event whose start time is 0 and whose end time is its parent's event length, basically. Which in this case doesn't seem to be working, so I'm going to give it a much longer end time or whatever. But now I'm curious if I've managed to break everything now by doing this. Right? It's still there. Everything's still there. I think everything's still connected in there. Let's make sure.
So if tracks can contain more than one data type, what is the step to composite and then output those? Like whether they're 2 separate tracks or whatever, right? Because then this either means each clip is being inherently routed to the compositing of that data type, or each track has a custom-made every time compositor for the multiple data types.
Yeah. Yep. That's where I go back to Greg and be like, yeah, you got to do what you got to do, kind of thing. Like that's where you have to decide what you're doing. I haven't made any decisions about that. It's a render. It's a representation of this number, of every object that has that number on it. Track 1. Yeah. Well, here, I'm going to go put this back because it didn't work. So, okay, so I've got a bunch of clips, and they all have been given, they've been put on different tracks simply by changing their track number. Now, if more structure is required, you might have a track event, and you put things in there and you hard set them to the parent's track ID. So that would be your way of putting everything on a track in a container, right? And your concept of a track is that container in a way, right? Yeah. It's just a number, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So your system goes out and it finds everything that's tagged clip
Yeah.
and it places it on the track that has the numbers.
Yeah.
Or it's not clip or events.
Both. They're clip events. They're events that are clips. The things inside are actually the file references for that clip. In this case, these have little file references within them. This is part of the thing is I'm proposing that you can build it in different ways. You can nest all the things a sequence needs inside of itself, right? So event, clip, file reference. Or you can just say event references the clip in the library, which references the file in the library. Right, so you can have all this stuff out here, and then only have references in your sequence. And then the player, so the player needs to know all the clips in whatever parent event you're calling a sequence that you give a player, and then it can inspect what you've decided to where you've put things on tracks. And this is where the I could come and say, okay, I've made a system in which now the UI will only allow you to put movies on movie tracks and audio on audio tracks and channels on channel tracks. The reason I'm not doing that is I haven't gotten there with this particular version, but also because I don't believe that's what is our ground foundation for what time sequencing needs to be in Touch, because those data types are indeterminate. I think we have to have we need to agree on the concept, the general concept of track playback, but determining what is on those tracks is not exactly up to us. And also the time that is sequenced abstract time and events that occur there, we should be able to parse them and play them in different ways, right? So you decide if a track has audio, video, and channels on it, then your player, when it connects to all of that, should have those three players, and it'll have to just parse out those three data types and play them at the same time, right? Let's see. So it gets that big table that I parsed in the parent event, the sequence, and there is this. So here's the track ID, right, that comes in, and in this case, it's all one big timer. So there has to be an ID to get the data out of the big timer, which is the element ID. So that's agnostic of track, right? So, and that's what drives the big timer. And then past that, here's tracks, right? This is where the rubber hits the road with tracks is actually here. Yeah, you could have more. Yeah. No, you're totally right about that. Yeah. Order modulo. So here's the player tracks, and this is where I think this is where you associate the track number that I gave any given clip with where it actually comes, because this is where that DAT comes in and we are selecting only the things on track 1. Yeah, well, track, channel, lane, there's all these thoughts, and one of the things is just choosing names that don't conflict with ones that are already in use. So my problem with channel is chops or kind of take that over, right? And we do in fact want chop playback, right? Channel playback, and then, and it's like I can't have we have to be able to let ourselves play a 100 channel chop in this system, right? So that's a good point. The naming game, trying to figure that. I had this concept of layer. You could have track and layer. You might have 10 layers on a track. But really, it's just that's why, and I'm sorry that this is so unsatisfying, this part, but it's because I don't believe there's a valid reason yet to really crystallize track for the general purposes. So it's like you need multiple dimensions. You might need multiple dimensions to make sequencing, and track is a very standby or an old crutch. Well, that's why I thought of the concept of layer, and I know, like for instance, in Greg's thing, layer is track kind of. But I like and then this is where if we go off into space a little bit, but we all know that time is this axis in our little world, even though it's but then I just find it useful, right? Track could be represented as it almost always is down in a UI. It does say, like, in time I'm in my own lane, right? Lane might be a thing. But I still like this concept of layer as well. And layer might even be not an integer, but actually you could, I'm thinking about like a crazy futuristic sequencer where I could select a layer as like an interpolated value across these kind of time layers, right? If I had a multi-layered track of video playing and I could look up different layers or put those layers into, there could also be a very pragmatic use where I have playback on a media system that's got 100 display surfaces, and I've had a content creator edit an entire thing has to be made out of 100 different files or for whatever reason, but I want to associate all of those as one big clip or something, and they all are, and then maybe this concept, and layer may be wrong, the wrong term, but what it is I need lots and lots and lots of streams of data that are all connected together in a clip, and they're moving on at the same track because I want them to move together when I change track, but there's also this other dimension of data. Exactly, yes, yeah. Yeah, X is time, Y is track, Z is layer, if you decide that's how you want to represent it. Well, and then tracks might open up into a little subdimension of that kind of thing. Yes, because you need to have you need to be able to sequence sequences. Yeah, the thought I was having was that we want to be able to parent these things. It might be a little too where my head was going is that you have these event comps. And wouldn't it be nice if in the procedural touch node editor, or maybe a slightly augmented version of you could parent these things in time. You might be able to parent these things in track or layer as well. Is it too much to say, well, if I parent this event, it's going to inherit its parent's track and start at its parent's time, and B, start at its parent's layer. But from there, can I offset the track? And if I do that, and this is where my head was per what you're just saying, if I change the track once I'm parented, am I now actually subtracking inside of the parent? or did I just offset down to the next track, right? If I go track 1 is my parent, and then inside I say track 1, right? Just think of it like geo-parenting. Did I just go down to track 2, or am I actually in sub-track 1 of my parent? Yeah. 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 That's what I think that's right. So it's not. So it's a different form of parenting in a way, or rather, it's not like geo-parenting. It's more like panel parenting. But that's what I'm getting at and that's where I think the cool futuristic end note of this talk is it. Yeah, but and the question is, what does that op family look like? Because yeah. I think it's a time, you have a base comp of time, which is what I'm right now calling an event, but I'm not, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just a time base. And then you've probably got almost like a null, which is an event with no time, so maybe it's the same thing. But the point is these are locators in time that they can parent. And then, yeah, this question is track is still, even in this concept, I think is a concept, right? Is a parameter of these, is a location in this dimensionality of these objects, right? And that's the hard part, because I don't know, I still can't, the only track component I've come up with now are the tracks in my player, which is where, like I said, the track actually crystallizes. It says, oh, you said you're track 1. I have been told that track 1 is a video player, so now all video data that has been given the number 1 is going to go through this player. And that's where the track actually turns into it, other than in your UIs where you can conceptualize it in any kind of way you want. If you've got sub-tracks, then you might have a little boop pop down and you see all your sub-tracks in a given track. I've also had thought of the concept of, if say you build a sequence and you're coming up with the hierarchy that you need for a system, wouldn't it be cool if, as you're building the sequence, you're like, all right, I need video, I'm going to need a animation thing to go with this character rig that's going to get the video behind it, and an audio track, and then you could kind of say, hey, like, proto player, here's my sequence, and then you get an option where you say conform to sequence. Right, and then it sets it. It's like, oh, okay, you got video here, you got audio here. Like, here's the player that's going to play this. Now, if you want, you could almost say like restrict design or something like that. And now, in my editor and in my player and in my sequences, as I'm building new ones, it will now no longer allow me to put video on that track or audio on that track. Right, but at the beginning, you want it to be amorphous. Right, you want to be able to decide what your given show needs. Yeah. And you could either do it by the player or by the data first, and then somewhere in there you can kind of like, okay, I think I'm good, I'm going to crystallize everything. And then maybe it's like while you're designing the show, you're like, shit, we just added a back wall projection that needs a whole other track layer, like unlock, change this, go fix all my sequences, give them placeholder for that or something, right? Or just allow me to now add to this new track, and then, okay, lock it back up, or something like that. Could be interesting.
So, and I both want them to grab the same thing, and then those can be sequenced over time.
Yeah, so I mean,
like a dimensionality expansion.
Yeah, but what you're getting at is, this is exactly what I think is, like, that is a very specific multi-use case, right, where you actually have 3 different, you're kind of talking about sequences that might share the same initial data, but you're playing them in different ways. You're breaking the source at different times. But that's what I mean is, right, that if you just had After Effects in Touch, you wouldn't be helped, right, because you still need all that flexibility, right, to be able to configure what you want. Because what you want, even though what you just described is, I mean, that's what you need. But like, I don't necessarily need to change the composite mode in time.
It's a superset. It's like the upper dimensionality of what everybody needs. Like,
It's a good example of a high.
one person might just lock and only have one output, but really want to play with
Yeah.
And then I set this over time, like it's a global timeline, but then these abstract columns can also act like the events, where these individual timelines are all sequenced, and then it becomes queue-based like QLab, or it becomes generative based on live input.
Yeah, well, and that was a part of this, all of these discussions about this event-based time, these components is, I need to do branching timelines also. Like, can't I have a switch time, right? If I've got one timeline and then I can go this way or that way, right? It's hard to think about. It's kind of bootstrapping the UI of Touch a little bit to think of chaining in time and then being able to either select something in or switch and go this way or that way in time dynamically, right? Like the ride that changes state and you need to go to this story so that somebody doesn't see something that they saw already or whatever.
Sorry. So, like, in that case, imagine if your output, like, when I said sequence on a timeline, what if that's generative, and then you switch between compositing modes and your data sources all stay the same. So, like, these switches in timelines don't have to be necessarily absolutely locked to time, essentially. It's like a more abstract method of composition.
Uh-huh.
And you also need to sequence another.
Well, and that's you also want one-shot events. You want to be able to, like, the notion of launching a preset at a given time, and then that gives you this whole problem of if I skipped that preset, do I need to go back and make sure that it set the things that got run, all that stuff. So, but I don't know. I mean, that's where that's going, and I think it would be important to try to kind of clearly define these things, and that's why I didn't the last thing I added just before we started talking was a little preview of the tracks, because I don't there's an over right there just so I can see something, but there's no notion here of what actually happens after the outputs of these players, right? Because that's up to you, right? Well, I should be able to, it should be this shouldn't even be here, right? This isn't.
That's not technically a track, that's a player.
Correct. This is the engine right now, yeah.
I think that's where there could be a new name in this.
Yeah, but that's what I've got, yeah. Events that have time, layer, and track. I know, but you can't tell any of these people it's a Y of 2. Oh, you mean track 2? Yeah. Well, yeah, actually track 2, but yeah.
I think what you're saying here is that track
Is Y.
we talk about it, but it's really not in the code, right?
Exact. It's just a user-defined thing, and then it might need to get locked at some point. Yeah, but
Or it's the integer in Y, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe layer.
That's like what you're saying. Everything is a clip.
Yes. Yeah.
1, 2 is track 1, layer 2.
Yeah. The reason I didn't stick with clip and with this word event right now, which I know maybe is not perfect. To me, clip still means there's a source, right? A clip has to be a clip of something, right? Because that's inherent. I took a reel of video and I'm grabbing this part of it, right? So again, it's not in time. It's a piece of time. That whereas an event is in time. Yeah. And a clip has a length, right? Not necessarily a start and an end. Or, right? I think that's the difference. Item. Yeah. Element. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, like,
But that's so cool. I know Reaper is crazy, right? It's like it's one of those things it's like it's you can configure it however you want. It has the advantage of only dealing with audio, right? But so it's like it has a global limitation that we don't have the advantage of. In Reaper, yeah. Reaper can do all kinds of stuff. It's a good paradigm to look at for sure. Yeah, it's a super ultra flexible items. Yeah. So, I honestly I would just have a you would drive a channel, and that's just gonna as it finds its way out of your sequencing system and into your compositing system. You're looking at a channel that's gonna change that switch somewhere in your engine, though, right? That's the different. I think it's like we have engines that drive each of these tracks may need a different engine for what it does, but even at the output of that engine is more stuff that may happen, and one of those track players might be a preset firer or a channel exporter that its only purpose is to sit there and export to your switch of your compositing system or something like that, right? So that could be one way. You might have a single chop channel track whose only job is to control your compositor, and you might have clips of that, or you might have sequences that have your video, your audio, and that channel, and those are 3 clips. Those might be 3 clips that are contained in an event. They're all set to the 0 of that event, and then you have sub events or you have sub sequences, right? That's the point. That's the other point, is to be able to, like you were saying, Keith, you can, I can have multiple events nested, and at some point that might represent the track format for my sequence, where I really need to have an audio-video channel clip format. And that's where it kind of starts, the atomic level of this gets hard to discern, but. Yeah, until I moved them. Yeah. Yeah. Right now it has no limitation. Like it doesn't have any stops to prevent that. Tags. So you give it a parent event, and it just goes and finds everybody. And so that would be could be cool about or has to be figured out as the parented track thing, like if I'm going inside of a parent event, and I then have a different track, like say like by default my track is 0 if I'm in my parent, but now I'm track 1. How do you deal with that? Maybe you have to decide what your player engine is going to do when it sees that, right? If children of something on track 1 say they're on track 1, do I treat them as on track 1? Do I treat them as on track 2? Or do I treat them as on parent track 1, track 1? But it's a tricky thing, right? You just say track and it's like so loaded, right? But if we can get everybody, I don't know. Maybe we have to have a new name